Our second reading is from the Gospel of Luke 2:15 to 21. When the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go straight to Bethlehem and see this event that God has made known to us." They hurried, and they found Mary and Joseph and a baby lying in the manger. And once they saw this, they reported what had been told concerning the child. All who heard about it were astonished at the report given by the shepherds. Mary treasured all of these things and reflected upon them on her heart. The shepherds went away glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, just as they had been told.
Over the years, we as a group of retreat goers who would gather, we'd take turns in leading moments of worship. On this one particular year, our worship leader was a Quaker woman. She implored us to sit in silence, as the Quaker movement is known to do, and if the Spirit was speaking, and if the Spirit was calling you to speak, to come forward. And so we sat in silence for about 45 seconds. But in a room full of preachers, we always like to hear ourselves speak and believe that God is always speaking to us. And so our silence, with only 45 seconds, extended to an hour and 15 minutes because nearly every preacher in the room decided that they must speak, and for surely God was speaking. But after an hour and 15 minutes, either we had exhausted God with what we thought God was speaking, or our stomachs were saying it was time for dinner. The next evening, she implored us to observe silence, and if we felt the Spirit speaking to us, to practice restraint. To practice restraint and test if what we believed God was speaking to us was God's voice or simply our voice thinking this is what God would speak. And so we sat for about 14 minutes in silence. And finally, one woman came forward sobbing, talking about how she had felt God speaking to her, that through the pain she had suffered throughout her life, that there could be healing. That she didn't always have to offer those words and tell the pain that she had suffered, but she could sit in silence and ponder God's loving embrace. Barbara Brown Taylor, preeminent preacher, theologian, scholar, college professor, in her book, When God is Silent, tells stories and examples of this. The book grew out of the Beecher lectures at Yale Divinity School. She shares this one image in the lectures of imagining oneself standing at the Grand Canyon, taking in its immense beauty and presence. But then lo and behold, someone with a cell phone, this is the days before iPhones, my friends, got on the phone, found a weak signal, and called back to Tennessee to share all the beauty they had with all the words they had, and as she described, ruining the majesty of God and embracing it before you. Sometimes we're working so hard to find the words that we miss the Spirit speaking. In the beginning was the Word. For me, when I hear it, it's sort of the primordial essence of God swirling about, the presence of God just being there, embracing us in all of creation. And it's just as difficult as reading the first chapter of John. No matter the translation, there are times that any speaker or reader or preacher that we tend to stumble over the words because they're repetitive and they come in phrases that we do not expect. Yeah, I imagine this is what God's voice is like at times. Today, on this first Sunday after Christmas, we hear part of that story again. We hear of the shepherds reporting what they had heard about the child. We hear Mary treasuring all of these things in her heart. Now, there's a tendency with some passages in scriptures where there are these silences built in, and I've done it as well, that we try to imagine as God's speakers here on earth, that we fill in the gaps. We tell a story of what might have been, what Mary may have thought, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes I believe the gaps in Scripture are there for us to ponder. Now, I promise I'm not going to make you sit here for 15 minutes in silence or listen to an hour and 15 minutes of all of us speaking of what God is saying among us. But I want us to just sit for a moment and to imagine, with eyes opened or closed, what did those shepherds report concerning the child? Mary treasured all those things in her heart and reflected upon them. Mary's words are not offered, but what do we hear as we ponder these words? Perhaps our pondering has been meaningful for some, perhaps annoying for others, perhaps too long. But we are called sometimes to practice restraint, as Barbara Brown Taylor would say. And I know I've shared this story from her book before in worship, but she describes it as she is talking to future preachers, is sometimes it's like a minister coming and preaching the greatest sermon and gets us to that place that we are feeling the word and ready to take it in. And she describes it like the minister has preached the best sermon, has cooked the bacon and eggs, the sausage, the vegan sausage, and lo and behold, he sits down and eats it all himself. That got us so close, yet we give it all back to ourselves. My friends, I do believe that especially in this season of Christmas, after opening gifts, cherished phone calls, FaceTime with our beloved daughters and sons and parents and neighbors, that with all these words that have filled our heart, we too can ponder them and pause like Mary and to acknowledge it. Sometimes the inaudible word is just grasping another's hand. Sometimes it's just sitting there and being present. In the beginning, there was the Word. In this moment, there is the Word. In the future, there will be the Word. And what is the Spirit of God saying unto you?